No Hard Feelings is the kind of comedy a lot of studios have been afraid to put out for the past 10 plus years. But the question is it good? Well, let's get into it. What's up, my dude? Your friendly neighborhood Tony here, and I just got back from watching the latest Jennifer Lawrence R-rated comedy in theaters called No Hard Feelings. And as I do with all my reviews, I'm gonna share a little bit of information about the movie, the pros, the cons, and then finally let you know whether I think this is a movie that you should spend your time and money seeing in theaters. If that kind of thing sounds cool to you and you want to see more movie reviews just like this, make sure you subscribe. As I mentioned before, this movie is starring Jennifer Lawrence in her return to film after having her first child. She took a little bit of time off, but she's definitely back in full effect with this movie. It's directed by Stupnitsky, who you might know from directing a movie that came out a few years back called Good Boys, another R-rated comedy that made a fair chunk of change in theaters, but I don't really think stuck with the audience after the fact. But it definitely looks like Stupnitsky has his genre of movies that he enjoys doing. So a quick plot summary for No Hard Feelings off of IMDb. It says here, on the brink of losing her home, Maddie finds an intriguing job listing. Helicopter parents looking for someone to bring their introverted 19-year-old son out of his shell before college. She has one summer to make him a man or die trying. So right off the bat, going into the movie, there was definitely a little bit of concern about the concept. You know, it's an older, more mature and experienced person kind of taking advantage of a much younger and inexperienced person. And of course, that's something that we would frown on in the real world, but here's where I'll get on my soapbox a little bit. When it comes to movies specifically, or really any genre of creativity and storytelling, just because your main character is doing a bad thing doesn't mean that that is the creator of that film or book or whatever telling you that they think it's a good idea to do these bad things. In fact, it reminds me of the show Always Sunny in Philadelphia. That show is about a group of terrible people doing terrible things all the time. But that's the whole point of the show. It's look at these terrible people doing bad things and being just really dumb along the way. And so yes, the concept of an older person taking advantage of a younger person is horrible, but that's the point of the movie. Jennifer Lawrence's character is a bad person. And of course, throughout the movie, we'll find out if she's able to redeem herself. Now, the movie also stars Barth Feldman. He plays that 19-year-old son, and you may or may not be familiar with him. I was only familiar with him, honestly, through my girlfriend. She showed me a TikTok or an Instagram video of him singing a song from the most recent Little Mermaid movie. And it turns out he's actually been on Broadway fairly recently playing Evan Hansen in Dear Evan Hansen the musical. So he is a pretty well-known Broadway performer, although he's only done really a couple movies, including this one. In the movie, you have Benanti and Matthew Broderick, who are playing his parents, and they are both phenomenal. But we'll get more into that in the pros section of my review. So let's go ahead and get started there. For one, this movie is advertised as an R-rated raunchy comedy, and it definitely has a fair bit of that in the movie, but there are also some genuine heartwarming moments throughout the movie, largely due to the writing, but also due to Jennifer Lawrence and Andrew's performances. They're both very likable in the movie, despite their very clear flaws. You know, I was really surprised to find that Jennifer Lawrence hasn't really done many, if any, comedic roles in her career. And in this movie, she really gets to lean into her comedic side, which I feel like is really who she is in life. Not to say she is the character in this movie, but rather that she is a pretty funny, goofy person. So she's really believable as her character. And aside from this movie, she's really focused on doing super serious, kind of award-focused movies or giant blockbusters. So it's really cool to see her kind of branch out a little bit and do just a straight comedy. It looks like she might be on a bit of a journey to do more of these comedic type movies, and I'm here for it. Also, this Andrew kid, he is phenomenal in his role. He plays that awkward, nerdy character really well, but not so much to be a caricature of that type of character. And in addition to being awkward and nerdy and goofy, he has a sense of charm and intellect that really comes across as well. I was really blown away by his performance. I didn't know what to expect, but a number of times throughout the movie, I just found myself in awe of his acting ability, and I cannot wait to see what else he does. Aside from those two, the rest of the supporting cast was also really great. As I mentioned before, you have Matthew Broderick and Benanti, who are playing the parents, and they're both definitely a bit goofy and quirky, but not so much to take you out of, you know, the realism of the movie. And I feel like that's a really important thing in comedy that is very easy to get wrong. You know, I'm reminded of Leslie Nielsen. For you younger kids, he was an older comedic actor, and his movies were especially hilarious because he always played his role super straight, and the comedy wasn't in him acting goofy and over the top, but it was about him being very serious when the most ridiculous things were happening around him. And that's what they do here in this movie. Yes, the characters are a little silly from time to time, but really it's the circumstances that are so absurd that if you play your character authentically, it's gonna come off as so much funnier. Also, just as an aside, if you wanna dip your toe into a little bit of Leslie Nielsen's work, definitely check out Airplane, that is a classic, or the Naked Gun trilogy. All those movies are absolutely brilliant. Aside from that, a cool thing that they do in this movie is there's also a little bit of a message throughout it. And I remember, I think it was Dave Chappelle talking about the different levels of comedy. He was talking specifically about stand-up, but I think it also makes sense when it comes to movies. And at the very bottom level is when you're just making jokes about things that you think are going to get a laugh. It's not necessarily anything that means anything to you or even relates to you, but you just know if you say or do certain things, people will laugh at it. Then a step up from there is when you start to make comedy about things that do mean something to you. It could be your life experiences, it could be your views on certain things, but then a level even above that, which most comedians or comedic storytellers never get to, is when you can say something that means something to you that is funny, but also can get people to think about themselves. So it may be something that they necessarily don't want to have to face, but you say it in such a funny way that they can't help but take it in. And that is the highest level of comedy, at least according to this random quote I think I remember Dave Chappelle saying. But this movie, it starts to reach into those levels, which is really cool. It has a bit of a message about helicopter parenting and how that can have an adverse effect on your child. It also talks a little bit about gentrification, oddly enough. You know, they live in this seaside town in New York. I want to say upstate New York. I could be wrong on that. But either way, they live in this seaside town that Jennifer Lawrence's character has grown up in, and now all of these super rich people are moving in, which is making it impossible to live there if you're a native, just because of all the prices going up. So it talks a little bit about that, which is something I can definitely relate to being in Florida. Then they also talk about the different generational differences and how the younger generation now is so connected digitally through their phones and through the internet and all of that, and may not be making the same physical connections as prior generations had, but at the same time are more connected in other ways. Right? You can have tons of friends online from all over the world, and yet at the same time, maybe not be hanging out with people locally in your own town. So it's just a different way of communicating and dealing with each other. And it touches on all these things throughout the movie, which is really cool without being overly preachy or anything like that. So I just really appreciated that from a comedy. All right, before we get into the cons of this movie, a quick word from our sponsor, you. That's right, you may not have known this, but you are sponsoring my channel right now by watching this video. So thanks so much for doing that. If you want to be super mega awesome though and go above and beyond, there are a few ways that you can sponsor even further. The biggest one is by joining as a channel member. If you scroll down to the description box below, there's a link to join as a member. Basically, you just throw me a couple bucks a month and you get more access to me and more of a direct connection to the channel. So check that out if you're interested. If you don't feel like throwing a couple bucks my way, that's cool. I also have an Amazon affiliate link in the description box. So if you plan on buying anything on Amazon today, if you go through that link, it doesn't cost you anything extra and it just gives me a little kickback. But even without all that, just watching, liking, and subscribing are massive, and I really appreciate it. So thanks for being a sponsor. Okay, now as far as my cons are concerned, man, I was really thinking about this one and I could only come up with one real con. And that is that they set up a couple of threads in this movie, specifically with a couple of different characters, and they never really follow those threads. And I understand that the movie is already, I think, an hour, 45 minutes or somewhere around there. So maybe they were just trying to really pack it in and get through it. So I understand that and I respect that. You don't want your comedies to run too long. But I almost felt like if you're not going to follow those character threads and they're not going to have a real significant impact on the story, I guess we could have just done without them. But again, this is just me being really nitpicky. The movie overall was genuinely great. Now, of course, comedy, in my opinion, is the most subjective film genre out there. And it's probably the most difficult to pin down who exactly would or wouldn't like a certain movie. But if you're in the mood for an early 2000s style raunchy comedy, this is a solid pick. I feel like we really just don't get enough of these mid-budget adult comedy films anymore. And this movie shows that it is still entirely possible to make them at a very high level. The question is really, will it make enough money to keep the genre alive? I hope so, but it's ultimately up to you. So let me know what you think in the comments below. If you've seen No Hard Feelings, did you like it as much as I did? Did you have more negatives than positives? And what are your thoughts on Jennifer Lawrence kind of leaning more into the comedy side of things? Whatever your thoughts are, let me know in the comments below. And of course, if you want to see more movie reviews, ranking videos, trailer reactions, all that fun stuff, make sure you subscribe. All right, I'll catch you in the next one. Be good.